Good News collection, Sri Lanka's Pride. This new publication shares positive and uplifting stories from across Sri Lanka and much more.
So I guess dreams do come true if they're meant for you. I work in aviation, design airports, I work in rail, cultural buildings. Outside of work, on a personal level, I try to retain aspects of my life that make me me. I love to sing. I was born by the river. I love going to concerts, I love seeing live performances, I love going for musicals and catching up with friends and trying out new restaurants.
An architect and a singer. Nice combo.
She's gone, but she used to be mine. Hi, I'm Roshani de Silva, and I will be answering Living's questions today.
So we have with us today Roshani de Silva, who is an associate at Grimshaw based in Australia. Roshani, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so we'll dive into the first question. You're a Sri Lankan by roots, but practice architecture in Australia. How did your early life and exposure to space, culture, and environment shape your decision to become an architect?
Well, I come from a very creative family and I've had exposure to theatre, art, music and literature from a very early age. So I think it was a no-brainer that I went into a creative field. As a child, I loved playing with Lego. I know this is a cliche for all architects, but that's how it started. I didn't just make designs according to the instructions. But I had various other iterations of buildings, and I remember one day my mom saw something I had built and said, "Oh, you're a little architect." And I think that was the first time I heard the word architect, but it piqued my interest, and yeah, that's the start of it. I think I also became intuitively aware of how good spaces made me feel. I remember visiting the Kandalama Hotel when I was about 6, and I was just in awe of what I saw. I didn't really know what I was feeling, but I knew it was special. And I visited the hotel a few years ago actually, and I was still as enthralled as I was as a kid. And I think that just goes to show that good design transcends ages and it has lasting influence. And the other thing I think I should say that traditionally architecture is a very male-dominant field, and a lot of parents are, I wouldn't say opposed, are resistant to their daughters entering the field. But my wonderful parents, when I told them that I wanted to become an architect, they just paved the way for me. They did not hold me back. They supported me in all my decisions, and even they believed in me when I doubted myself. So yeah, I think I've had a lot of support, and I really owe it to them. And where I am is just because of them.
Amazing. I think that early beginnings make a lot of difference, right?
Yeah, they really do. I think the support more than anything really helps.
So what was the transition like building a career in architecture overseas, and how did that experience challenge or redefine the way that you see design today?
So I did my bachelor's or SLIA Part 1 in Sri Lanka, and I decided to move to go to Melbourne to do my master's. I think there was quite a bit of a culture shock when I moved there, because I saw that there were different construction methodologies and technologies and building information modeling. And I was quite taken aback when I saw the technological gap between Sri Lanka and the Western world. So when I graduated from my master's, it was towards the tail end of the GFC, and there wasn't a lot of work there in Melbourne, so I decided to come back to Sri Lanka. And I worked here for a couple of years. I even did my architect's registration here. And then I decided to move there permanently. When I moved there, I didn't get a job in architecture straight away. In Australia, residential architecture or residential design is dominated by master builders. They are essentially companies that design and construct residential buildings. So, you could call them cookie cutter buildings, but they can be modified. So my first job was at a design and construction company. I was there for about 6 months. Then moving back to when I was a student of architecture and how I ended up at Grimshaw is when I was in the first year of architecture in Sri Lanka, I learned about this building called the Eden Project, designed by a London-based studio called Grimshaw. And I was really fascinated by it, and it was just completely out of the norm. And I thought to myself, oh, it would be cool to work for this company. And it was just a dream because I didn't really have any plans to move overseas at the time. So it was just in passing. And then fast forward to 2017, I'm living in Melbourne, and then I met this lovely couple at a dinner who worked at Grimshaw, and we got talking, and when they said they worked at Grimshaw, I said, oh, it's my dream to work there. And they said, oh, send your portfolio over because they're hiring at the moment. 2 weeks later, I got the call for an interview, and then a month later, I was working there. So I guess dreams do come true if they're meant for you. And at Grimshaw, so Grimshaw is essentially Sir Nicholas Grimshaw, who passed away last year, is a pioneer of high-tech architecture. And high-tech architecture is architecture that celebrates structure. It innovates engineering. It looks at buildings from a different perspective, not just aesthetic. They're more functional and modular, and they can be adapted and reused. And they produce high-quality design outcomes that are also sustainable, which very much aligned with my values. And at Grimshaw, I've been given incredible opportunities to work on projects that I have never even dreamed of. I work in aviation, I design airports, I work in rail, and in cultural buildings. Most notably, I've done work at Melbourne Airport. There's the iconic Melbourne Wall that everybody takes photos in front of when they arrive. That's a project I worked on, and I'm very, very proud to have been a part of it. I'm currently working on a project called the 12 Apostles Visitor Centre, which, if you've been to Melbourne, it's the 12 Apostles are the most visited tourist attraction in Victoria. So it's essentially a series of limestone maybe pillars in the ocean that have come about due to erosion. So now we are constructing a visitor center which has galleries, cafes, and interactive experiences for the visitors. And what's most notable is that it has been designed, it's a co-design project with the traditional owners of the land, the Aboriginal owners, who are Eastern Ma Aboriginal Corporation. So that's very unique. And it lends its hand to reconciliation between the traditional owners and us who are essentially living on their land. So yeah, it's just been incredible, and it's just revolutionized the way I think about design, from going from small scale residential architecture over here to large scale industrial design over there.
Wow, that's an amazing journey.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And I have to say, I'm very proud to have been able to contribute to the built landscape of Melbourne, but I'm also proud now as a part of the leadership team as Grimshaw to represent Sri Lanka at a global design firm.
So, architecture often reflects the way we live. How does your personal life values influence the spaces that you design?
I think I might just touch on one very important point here. As a woman, safety is not an abstract concept for me, and all women. And I think it influences the way we see space, the way we navigate through space, and the way I design space. So we pay very close attention to how spaces behave throughout the day, how enclosed they feel and how open they feel, and how it makes people feel vulnerable or liberated and free. And in design, what this means is creating spaces that have very good natural light, that don't have closed corners, and have very open layouts. How when you're within a space, you're able to navigate quite freely. You have intuitive wayfinding. You're able to experience the space, but also you're able to leave the space quite easily. That's really important, and it's also important to have passive surveillance. So we pay attention to how spaces encourage other people to come into them, so that you don't feel alone and you feel observed but not watched and oppressed, which is also important. And I think safety goes hand in hand with dignity, and so it enables vulnerable people like women and other people who have different abilities to experience space freely and with dignity.
That's a lovely concept, the way you put it. Okay. So, being back in Sri Lanka for 3 weeks, you're on vacation, right? What stands out to you now, creatively or emotionally, when you experience familiar spaces all over again?
Well, it's been a while since I came to Sri Lanka, because I haven't been able to visit as often as I would like because of various things, COVID and being busy life. But I've been really surprised at how much development has taken place in a very short space of time. So there isn't a lot that's familiar to me anymore. And I sometimes have to ask my parents and my siblings, like, where are we? What is this building? I know the general area, but it looks very different to what I lived through when I was growing up. There has been a lot of development, but I have to say that some of it at the moment hasn't really been designed and integrated very well with its existing context. So most notably the existing urban grain and natural grain and the human scale and our culture. So I look to, especially I think Golf Face was a completely different experience when I came this time. I looked at it and I couldn't really tell which country I was in. And I was like, is this Singapore or is it Colombo? And I think it's important to keep in mind the culture or existing grain that you are building into when you introduce new buildings into the context. And I think we've got some incredible architects in Sri Lanka who are very responsive to those aspects of our culture and our vernacular, and they should be consulted as well. And another thing I noticed recently when I was along the coast, there were these new hotels that had been constructed. And for example, I was at Jetwing Blue recently, and right next to it there was another very tall hotel building that was constructed. Jetwing Blue was designed by Jeffrey Bauer, and it's very low and it blends really neatly into its context. It's very unobtrusive. It's beautiful. It has views to the ocean. It encourages natural ventilation. But there was this tower that was built right next to it that just stuck out, and it was clear that it wasn't really responding to its context. So scale is very important. And I think when a building is introduced into an existing context, it should add to the culture of that context, not dilute it.
I guess that's the difference between an architect and a normal human being, because we probably wouldn't think the way that you're thinking, right? Oh, okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So architecture can be demanding, right? How do you maintain balance between creativity, work, and personal well-being, which I think is very important?
It's very important. Yeah, it's a great question. I think architecture, as you said, is very demanding, and I personally see it as a lifestyle and not just a profession, because it's all consuming if you let it, and you are constantly designing, and inspiration can strike at any moment, and sometimes even you keep on refining your work even after a project is complete. Sometimes you think, oh no, I should have done it like this, it should have been like that, and it just does not stop. And I think you have to make an active effort to set boundaries between work, because there is a lot of work, and there are some people who still think that you have to work long hours to get the work done. But I think we really need, the dark side of our passion is essentially that we are notorious, I have to say, that for doing long hours and a lot of unpaid overtime. But in this context, I think it just leads to burnout. So we really should take better care of ourselves. And I think it's essential that we work more efficiently, we work smarter and not harder, and we delegate and we manage clients' expectations so that we don't sacrifice our well-being for the work that we do, but we still produce really good outcomes. I know there's a lot of talk about AI right now and how AI is gonna take over architects' jobs. I don't believe that a machine can do what we do, because there's a lot that goes into it that is quite emotional, and it requires that human touch. However, AI is here whether we like it or not, and we need to adapt and use it essentially, and if not, we're going to get left behind. So there are a lot of tools at the moment that are really helpful, that make life a lot more efficient, and I think we can use those tools to help us through our day. There's plenty that's at our disposal, so we should definitely be using that. And outside of work, I suppose on a personal level, I try to retain aspects of my life that make me me. I love to sing. I used to sing with soul sounds when I was here. I was bound by the river, in a little tent, just like the river. I've been running ever since. It's been a long. And moving to Melbourne, I don't really have that. I think what we had here was very, very special. I'm still very good friends with the girls I used to sing with. But over there, what I try to do is I train. I take singing lessons, and I also try to, when the opportunity arises, I try to perform guest spots in gigs. So I feel very much alive when I'm on stage, so I try to do it as much as possible. I've always been an avid bibliophile, and I try to retain that habit. I love working out, and I have learned, because now we have very little time, that I can stack two habits by listening to audiobooks in the gym. So it's like that makes me feel very good. And also, I think I'm very lucky to live in a city that has a very rich culture and food scene, actually. And I love going to concerts. I love seeing live performances. I love going for musicals and catching up with friends and trying out new restaurants. Yeah, that's what I do.
An architect and a singer. Nice combo.
She's gone, but she used to be mine.
So, what do you think Sri Lanka does uniquely well when it comes to space, form, or living? Something the rest of the world probably could learn from.
I think there's a lot the world can learn from. At the moment, the world is going through a climate crisis and also a loneliness epidemic. And I think traditional Sri Lankan architect and tropical architecture have some very important lessons that can provide solutions to these problems. First of all, traditional Sri Lankan architecture is inherently passive. So passive design is now a buzzword because we're in this climate crisis. But traditional architecture it works with the climate, not against it. So if you look at old Valawas, they have very deep overhanging roofs. There's a lot of shade. There's clay tiles on their roofs. They've got a lot of natural ventilation, courtyards. Cross ventilation is very important. The materials that are used are very natural. There's brick and clay walls. There's clay tiles on the roof, and it keeps the interior of the house cool despite the heat outside. So this eliminates the need for mechanical ventilation, and then it reduces the carbon footprint of the house as well. So there's a lot to learn there. And we're actually going back to those principles of vernacular architecture at the moment, because people have realized, it's not just about efficiency, it's about touching the earth lightly, and Sri Lankan architecture does that. And I think secondly, going back to this loneliness epidemic, there is, at the moment, there's the concept of third spaces is being lost. So third spaces are spaces between work and home that life takes place in. And there are places like coffee shops. And, you watch friends and they hang out at the coffee shop all day long, and that's where life takes place. And you have all of these chance encounters, and you meet people and you have these conversations. So what's happening right now, going with the coffee shop example, coffee shops actually favoring turnover. And the design and layout and furniture that's used in the coffee shop is essentially discouraging people from hanging out there and staying there for long periods of time, because that's not conducive to the business. So, and the other thing is, in the US, I read recently that they've replaced bench seats with leaning devices, essentially like leaning benches, which discourages homeless people from sleeping there. But that also discourages people from sitting down and having a conversation. So tying in with Sri Lankan architecture, I think the concept of the veranda is a third space. It is neither inside nor outside. It's not private nor public. So it's this in-between space between your home and the outside that encourages people to sit and talk. And you can receive guests there. You can people watch when you invite guests, they don't really intrude into the privacy of the home, but they stay there. So it encourages people to just stop by. And because tropical communities are our cultures are very community based, it encourages this conversation. So I think that we could look into the concept of the veranda to create or to reduce this issue of loneliness. Yeah, and I think the tenets of tropical architecture are inherently sustainable. So I think there's a lot to learn. So I think we are heading in that direction. But yeah, let's see how it goes.
I like the concept of the third space. Very nice. All right, so we come to the last question in this segment. As architecture continues to evolve with sustainability, technology, and changing lifestyles, what excites you the most about the future of design?
I think what's happening now, I think, is architecture is moving away from impressive mega designs. I think beauty is important. However, buildings need to be more intelligent. And what excites me is that clients, at least my experience in Melbourne over there, is that they are also on board with creating more efficient buildings rather than showy buildings and flashy buildings. So what I think is a lot of these technologies that we're using, they're invisible. For example, the project that I'm working on, the 12 Apostles Visitor Center, is a passive house building. So what that means is passive house is mostly used in temperate climates. Buildings have air gaps, essentially. Every single building has gaps. And what that means is it makes air leak out of the building rather than stay within the building. So when you are heating or cooling the building, it becomes very inefficient because the mechanical ventilation has to keep pumping to keep the building at a constant temperature. So what passive house does is we start very early on. We start designing and looking at all of the gaps in the building and all of the thermal bridges, which essentially means locations where the heat or cool on the outside can come into the building. And we design out all of those inefficiencies and essentially make a building very airtight so that the mechanical ventilation runs and we keep our air changes per hour very, very low. So the initial cost of it is quite high. However, the running cost of it is comparatively low. And this is not something the average user would see, but to the building operators, that's really efficient because their costs remain minimal. So that's a technology that's really, really useful. And I think another thing is, I think people will realize the value of architects when it comes to designing spaces that feel good, not just look good. And I'm excited for that. And I think people will come to realize that they do need architects and that is essential, that we have a lot to give. And that our input is extremely valuable to create not only a beautiful world to live in, but also a very functional and efficient world.
All right, so that was very, very interesting. So we've come to the end of segment 1, Roshani, and we have a fun little game for you on the other side. So we will see you soon.
Thank you.
The latest issue of LMD is available at lmdmall.lk. You can also access the digital version on Press Reader, Maxter, our social media platforms, and WhatsApp. The Voice of Business, a legacy of 30 years.
Alright, Roshani, welcome back to segment 2, which we have a fun little game for you. So what we have for you today is a rapid fire round. So let's start with the first one. Morning person or night thinker?
Night thinker for sure.
City living or nature retreats?
City living.
Minimalist spaces or layered textures?
Oh, it's an interesting one. I think something in between. I think minimalism is great, but I think there's a lot of, and this is coming from somebody who is Asian, and we've got a lot of culture and color and texture to offer. So it has to be balanced. Of course, I'm gonna say both.
Okay.
Both.
Right, the next one's a little tough. Sri Lanka or Australia? Where do you feel most creatively inspired?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think looking at the countries, I think each place has a lot to offer. I think culturally Sri Lanka is very, very rich, and there is a lot to be inspired by, and I think our communities have a lot to offer. And I'm very inspired by our tight-knit families and how giving and kind people are over here. I think Australia is different. It's a different. It's a more individualist culture. But so I think, in terms of what Australia has to offer, in terms of inspiration, would probably be technology and capability.
So coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Sketching by hand or designing digitally?
I do a little bit of both, actually. Sometimes it's great. Sketching by hand is great for thinking. But sometimes I am stuck for time. So I take the easy way out and I design digitally. But it's not encouraged.
So open plan living or defined spaces?
I think it's hard to pick one because I think they are both necessary depending on the function. So defined spaces are important for privacy, and life happens both in those open plan spaces and defined spaces. And especially in terms of living, privacy is very important. So I'd say open plan living for community activities and private spaces for downtime.
Favorite time of day to experience a building?
Oof, that's a hard one because buildings are different at different times of the day. I think the evening, like sunset, would be great because you kind of experience the transition from day to night and see the lights come on as well, and then the sky looks incredible at that time.
The golden hour.
The golden hour, yeah.
Work trips or slow holidays?
Slow holidays.
A place you instantly feel calm in?
Lunoganga.
Nice, okay. Neutral tones or bold accents?
I think I like dressing neutral, but with a bold accent.
Designing for beauty or function, if you had to choose one of them?
Form follows function, so I would say function.
Music or silence while working?
Music.
A city that inspires you the most?
I visited Paris last year and it was just the most incredible experience. So yeah, Paris.
One word to describe your design philosophy?
Contextual.
What's inspiring you right now?
Innovation, I think. There's a lot of technology out there that helps us think out of the box and that's pushing our boundaries, and there's a lot of learning taking place. I think that's quite inspiring.
All right, Roshani, that comes to the end of segment 2 and the end of our show. Thank you very much for being on the show, and we wish you all the very best. And we hope to see many more design inspirations coming from you and your company. And we wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much for having me, Tanya. It's been a pleasure talking to you. There you have it. These are my answers to the questions and the game. Be sure to check Living's Instagram and Facebook pages for the latest episode of Living Gets Real.